Hello and welcome back to PA Truck Up. Today we have two guests. Hello, Mark and Brad. How are we doing?
Doing well. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast with you, and we've enjoyed connecting with you.
Yeah, we appreciate you having us here, Manny.
Nah, it's all good. It's been a long time coming, and I think our original call was very productive and very informative for me at least. Specifically, the latter portion of that when we're speaking about whiskies and different types of whiskies that we're into. um, But no, thank you guys for coming on and just being a part of the podcast experience. If you just let us know who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Mark Small. We're on today from Poseidon Strength, and we're a startup from the United States. We're based in Pennsylvania, and we're bringing to market a simpler, safer, more durable way to diagnose strength and rehab athletes. I'm the mechanical engineer for the brand, so the initial concept was my brainchild. Started it while I was running an R&D lab in the heavy manufacturing sector, and I've always just been a tremendous fan of fitness and kind of saw a place to um, rapidly and accurately assess data and then apply that to the athletic realm.
The original thing that got me introduced. Everyone at this point of the podcast has already seen the mechanics behind it and how it works. But if you just sort of walk us through how it initially started.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what prompted the idea as an engineer, I think we're probably notorious for overthinking things. But when you think about, weightlifting is just an interesting concept to me from the physics aspect. And I think, the fact that you're quite often when you go to lift, you're trying to pick a number of reps at which you might struggle at. So you start out and you say, okay, I can probably do a weight that by my sixth or eighth rep, it's really going to be hard for me. And that just seems like a silly concept to me. Why couldn't you get the maximum effort out of every lift that you're doing? Wouldn't that be a more efficient way to work out? So that led me down the path of isokinetics. And the more research you do into isokinetics, you find that it's been a very proven and successful method in the rehabilitation world. And
Mm,
there's an abundance of NIH studies out there to support, its efficacy, and a lot of studies to show that it will actually make people stronger faster. So you start to look at, how can you apply that to kind of a rapid and durable strength realm. And yeah, my first built prototypes by getting my hands on an old like hack squat machine and bolting my tech to it and starting to do some tests. And then I think the other interesting aspect of what we're doing is that it's very simple then with our isokinetic tech to be able to acquire data and acquire that data rapidly and turn it into very meaningful metrics to show somebody, what their power output is at different prescribed velocities.
yeah, with the data collection side, how did you come up with a concept to measure the output, and then how is that sort of developed into what the machine is now?
Um, so in the data collection world, most sensors operate somewhat similarly, whether it be force plates or the type of sensor that we use. You can pick a sampling rate and collect as much data as you want. So it was very easy for us to collect data that would directly correlate to how many pounds you're producing in force. And then we took the time to do a lot of product market fit surveys, which connected us with a lot of just wonderful individuals in the strength and conditioning and athletic training world. And it was very easy to, go back and look at the conversations that we had with like the first 20 individuals and just hear the kind of their vernacular. What were the
Mhm.
units that were important to them? What were they measuring? Power is very important. Everything that's out there in the VBT world, and then we ultimately sat down and said, okay, here's what we're collecting as far as pounds lifted through an entire workout. And we know a velocity. So to look at force, to look at power, and to do some true VBT prescriptions was very easy for us to do. But I mean, really, I think all the coaches that took the time to, spend time with us and explain what's important to them, we owe them all the credit because we got an education from them.
Mm. How was that process behind meeting up with these coaches and getting into these facilities to talk with them and then to show the product?
Sure. I think starting out there, it's interesting because, nobody knows who you are. So finding like the first ones that are willing to take a risk on you and, connect with you, that it's a little bit of a challenge. But what we really found was, and I think this was somewhat a reassurance that we were going down a good path. Once we had our first 5 or 10 connections, one of the questions we asked everybody was, are there other people in the industry that you could connect us with, especially ones
Mm,
that would find this interesting? And I would say pretty much everybody that we talked to was willing to say, yeah, let me send you a couple contacts, or what region are you looking to go to? I know people, all over. And yeah, I think one thing we can never comment enough about is just how much we love the industry. It's a very, very passionate industry, and everybody's very excited to be, doing what they're doing. So once we had a little bit of a name for ourselves and we would get that referral, we found that people were very open to talking to us and hearing about what we were trying to accomplish.
100%. And I think you've nailed it on the head. I'm trying to do this a lot more in the UK side or like Europe side, where connections is a lot of what we do. So like networking, and specifically in America with the culture that there is around strength and conditioning, like having been mentored by Ron McKeefe, like we know that anyone that has been a strength coach or is a strength coach knows of him or has connected with them. So having that connection, you're just like you're already like in this massive network of people that somehow know each other. And like that to me isn't surprising that every coach that you've spoke to have been like, here's 5 contacts, here's how has that sort of helped the growth and development of the product and how you've developed it.
Yeah, I think how that helped growth was, we're at a point now where we've connected with roughly 150 industry experts. And really, we went from the first 5 to 150 by that referral system. And,
Yeah.
to your point, we pretty early on identified how much of a tight community it is, because, we would even connect with coaches and they would say, where else have you guys been? And we would say, oh, I was texting that guy last night, or, oh, I see that guy every year at such and such event.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just think the tight knit aspect and the willingness to refer, and then the willingness for people to hear us, all those things definitely worked in our favor to build out from 5 to 150.
Yeah. With the sort of development and then coming to market, how has that process been like for you guys?
Yeah, so we started out where we had this Isokinetic tech and the data acquisition, and we initially built independent strength machines. So we went after the pillars of strength, or we considered to be the pillars of strength, which were the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. And then early on, as we started conducting product market fit surveys, it was explained to us that the tech and the data acquisition everybody liked, but one thing that we found with just about any coach that we talk to is floor space is always at a premium. And they said we just wouldn't
Mm.
have the floor space to have multiple pieces of equipment to perform this type of analysis or to rehab an athlete. So we very early on identified how important it would be to make it very versatile. So the more that you can do with one piece of equipment, the better. So we did iterate, and we went to a piece of equipment that was rather large. It had a footprint of about 4 feet by 8 feet. And then when we did that iteration, we took a lot of the feedback we got on data acquisition and what metrics are important to coaches in the industry, and we built out our software at that same time. When we went back out and started showing that piece of equipment to the world, we got very good feedback on our software. Some of what's out there is somewhat time consuming to run, and some software makes it, or uses assumptions or mathematical formulas to make predictions. And what we were able to do was do very rapid, accurate, and efficient assessments that give you, real time data with an immediate feedback to the athlete. You don't wait for a report. You don't have to calculate anything. We give immediate feedback. Um, so we got very good feedback on our software with that iteration, but we were just told this thing is big, and it was 4 by 8
Mm.
feet for any piece of strength training equipment is pretty sizable. So we went back and we were able to iterate and get our the piece of product that we're building today down to about 30 by 16 inches. So we went to, we like to tell people it takes up about the same amount of space as like a steel column would that would, supports a building. And in the stored position, it really doesn't impede on a training floor space whatsoever.
Yeah. In terms of that refining process, how hard was it to get from this bigger piece to a smaller one?
Luckily, that as a business, that is one of our strengths. We have our own development lab, and I've always been very passionate about fabrication and mechanical design. So we can typically turn an initial prototype around. We can go from design to initial prototype in less than 2 months, and then
Wow.
we'll spend about 2 months just doing life cycle and fatigue testing. So with my R&D background, it's somewhat simple for us to build something to just cycle the machine, and just make sure that everything works repeatedly as it's intended.
Yeah. And with the coding element, I know you said that the consumer gets feedback immediately. How how was the coding element come together for that?
Yeah, so for the coding, that's been an interesting journey for us, and I think that will be something that's forever improving. Getting the mechanical structure, you have to nail that. But with software, what it is today, it's very easy to get feedback and make improvements, and then push that out to machines that you have out in the world. And in my travels, I came from very heavy industry where I've worked in very process critical jobs where things could not break or could not shut down,
Mm,
and I'd connected with a very good vendor in Pennsylvania that uses a very robust industrial and even military grade software. And it's used for things, from like heavy steel industry all the way to missile guidance systems. And that's the backbone of the software that we built. So we heard a lot of that very early on from coaches that they liked the durability aspect of our equipment. We've very purposefully built everything very heavy duty, and that carries
mm.
over to the software and the electronic hardware that we've sourced too.
That's something that I've always found interesting about America is that the durability of like Rogue or like these types of industries where metalwork is so prominent in that country where if it's not durable, you're going to run out of business really quick. Is that something that we might see eventually is like Poseidon Strength in World War III or something like this?
I hope there's no World War III, but if there is, we'd love to train people for it.
Yeah. No, but it's like that is one thing that has always amazed me is like the durability of some of these equipment pieces of equipment that's coming out in America. Is that something that obviously with your background, is that something that you had to have within that element? Was that durability of it?
Yeah, I absolutely can't stand anything that's not built well. And I think as a
Mhm.
gym goer all my life, like anybody listening to the podcast or anybody that's been in a commercial gym, you can walk around and you can see the handles that are chipped or plastic caps that were put on and they broke. And we use very little of that. Pretty much everything on our machine is either steel or aluminum. And
Mm.
even the hardware that we source, we use a very well built and a very good PC that comes with an impact rating and a waterproof rating. And I'm a big fan of the saying, "Nothing overbuilt ever failed," and we want to carry that over. It's very important for us to carry that over into the brand and try to build something that you just don't see big issues with.
One of the things that we first spoke about when we initially had a call was that everything has to be durable, which you've mentioned. But I'm wanting to sort of get your take on why it was, and I completely agree with this. I think you can put a piece of equipment in a public gym and it doesn't break. That's a sign of a good piece of equipment. What was your thought process behind putting that in a public gym where thousands and thousands of reps and sort of usage of it is going to happen?
Yeah, it probably just happened somewhat inherently because, in my days in heavy manufacturing, if I was part of a design that went in the floor and it broke, I was the one that got the phone call. So just from day one, I always wanted to design things that you weren't going to have significant, issues or failures behind. And I think we're just very proud of that. We want to manufacture things, here in the United States and just make a great product that people automatically assign durability to.
And with this sort of team that you're with, so with you and Brad, how do you bounce between each other, and how does that process work within the company?
Sure, that's a good question. When I first had the idea, I knew that one of my weaknesses was more on the sales and marketing side. So when I connected with Brad, we just instantly hit it off, and I think we balance each other well. And on the entrepreneurial path, there's a lot of highs and lows. So having the right business partner that kind of offsets you during the lows and you can enjoy the highs together. It's just been a great blend and a great partnership.
Yeah. So if Brad, if you can like give us a little breakdown on what you do and how it is that you sort of go through the industry with Mark.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, a lot of the credit goes to Mark for this being, his brainchild, and I have, supported that in the sense of it was very emotionally appealing to me of what he was setting out to accomplish here, and that just has to go with kind of personal experience of a lifelong athlete. Wasn't quite good enough to cut it at a college setting, but I had a brother who was on track to be a high-profile D1 collegiate baseball player. Had a serious knee injury his junior year, and never really recovered from it. And my experience was the early exposure to some of the technologies that were starting to be very prominent nowadays, like the force plates and VBT software. And I always had in the back of my head, could this kind of technology been what allowed him to come back to his prominence in baseball and
Mm,
maybe achieve even a professional level? So I always saw this from more of an emotional perspective, where Mark saw it as more a logical perspective of the efficiency of strength training. But you know, he said that I kind of complement the customer to the product, and he is kind of like the mechanics to the product. So we sort of fill that full spectrum of, uh, from early mechanical and product design to the customer end of it. So my job is really to drive the feedback loops, and ensure that we're really hitting the mark, get out and solicit feedback, and really try to address a primary challenge. And Mark touched on some of those of, the problems that we hear throughout the industry. Obviously, one of those that's obvious is the footprint within an
mm,
existing facility. But the other two that we really address well is efficient data collection. We know that data is how these elite organizations make decisions, and if you want to be competitive, you got to find every advantage you can, and that'll give you that 1%, up on the competition. And that's really what we're driving for: good broad stroke strength assessment to really understand how a team performs today. And then the other side of that is a safe and controlled RTP device. So return to play is pretty critical nowadays, and informing that process with data is paramount. So we do that really well, but we also deliver a device that's a really safe and controlled environment to reintroduce an athlete to force production.
I think I like this. I'm sort of just realizing that the balance between Mark and you, it's that like that technological brain or and then that emotional side and how those two can like complement each other. Like I think that's a really good pairing, especially because like me knowing some background onto you guys, like you travel a lot to show off this equipment and how it's used. So like I think having both there to sort of speak on the both sides of return to play and then how it's logistically working. I think that's a really good balance. Is that something that you sort of implement heavily and that's you just play onto that strength?
Yeah, and I think it honestly comes about pretty naturally. Of It depends on sort of who's in the room. We find people that are very mechanics
Mm,
focused. They want the durability of the machine, and then we have the other folks that are very, your athletes are your assets to your organization, and you want to protect those. So they invest in their athletes. We want to help protect them. That's kind of the emotional side of it, to where the logical side of it is you want something that can withstand the daily beating of an American football facility. And I know that you have a little bit of exposure to American football, and that was kind of the pinnacle of what we set out to achieve. Of, can we
mm.
build something that's durable enough to live in the daily abuse of a professional American football facility, but then also deliver that back end side of it, of that really safe and controlled environment to help you protect your assets.
Is that the thing that you sort of focused on was the return to play and how essentially how quick we can get these athletes back?
It wasn't our initial goal, honestly. This was kind of part of the product market fit phase that we found, that uh, the technology that we are implementing hails from the physical therapy side. We just tried to apply it to a more efficient way to build strength. So we were really going at it more from the strength training and diagnostics perspective. And then we heard as we got some of these out into the world that teams were really using this as a really great litmus test for return to play, because of the nature of it just being hailed in safety
Hmm.
and physical therapy. So it was kind
Yeah.
of like an added bonus that we learned after we started to go down the road of um, challenges that we can address with the machine.
Hmm. I think, and I mentioned this to you guys, was that was originally drew to Poseidon Strength because of its intent, like focus on the machine. So you're only exerting as much as you can physically do for that day or that set or that rep or like in general. How is that sort of how does it work mechanically to build something like that that's intent focused?
One thing I was going to say as Brad was speaking, it was a little bit humbling because we originally had the idea, and then as we connected with more and more people in the industry, we just realized that if we were going to succeed, we just had to listen to them. And then, really our intent and what we were building mechanically was just strictly driven by that. And I think, some of what we heard was just even the psychological aspect of returning to play. Like you're an athlete who you're cruising through your season, you're training, everything's going well, and then you suffer this injury. A lot of guys might have to have surgery. So one of the very early pieces of equipment that we got out into a Division I football world, that was its first initial use. Was a guy's coming back from a surgery, he's injured his knee, and you go through your range of motion, maybe band work, and now you hit the first day where you have to expose the body to force again. And I think when you really think about that, that's a terrifying aspect. So, we were able to mechanically deliver a machine that makes that the absolute safest and controlled environment to do that. You can not
Mm-hmm.
only, at any point in motion, you stop in your range of motion, there's no stored energy on you, there's no weight on you anymore. So you might have a part of a range of motion where things just don't feel quite 100%. So you could be generating a lot of force and then really fall off to almost no force and then pick back up as you work through that problem area. So our mechanical design was just, and it was ultimately driven by feedback around a lot of what we heard there from the psychologies and the protocols in return to play.
How much did you listen to, and how much did you have to sort of sift through when listening to different coaches and different differences of opinions?
It's a great question, and I think the easiest way to answer that is just commonality. So when we would get done talking to maybe 20 people, we would sit down together and we would look at all 20, the feedback from all 20, and there might be a top three that every single person said, and those are just your crystal clear answers. Like, if you're gonna succeed at what we're setting out to do, those are absolutely critical items. And then as you worked your way down the list, it would start to filter out, and you get down to the point where you would have points that just one person made. So we really
Mm,
drove it. It's funny that we collect data because a lot of our product development and the final product that we're taking to market was driven by data and, what
yeah,
we're saying.
as coaches, we all have our very own different ways of doing things and different names for different exercises that are the exact same exercise. So, as a product standpoint, some coaches are going to see the benefits to this one particular aspect of it. Some coaches might not see it. So for me, it was more like how did you sort through that and get that to the final product? And I think sifting through the interviews and what each key element was probably the easiest way to go about it.
Yeah, and the I think one of the biggest points of this, in what we really set out to do, there's kind of two ways that you can launch a product that is kind of new to an industry with an unknown consumer, and you can either build a product and try and force your way into market and tell everybody what you want them to believe, or you can go out and find a very specific audience with a very specific challenge and listen to their issues with what they have in their toolbox.
Hmm.
And we made that kind of core to our business focus was to build something that was very much valued and built by and for the audience that's going to be using it every day. And that's, strength coaches across sport, athletic trainers, sport PTs. And that's kind of what informed it. We talked to as many of them as possible. We listened to what some of their gripes were, or their challenges with their lack of technology, and then start building from there and iterating from there. So, Mark touched on doing nearly 150 product market fit interviews to really inform where we are today. And that really starts to show in the trajectory of our business. When we meet new folks who haven't been exposed to similar technology, and it's like an immediate click of,
Mm.
this is the exact purpose that your product serves. And that's been gratifying to see as we've kind of, you know, walked this journey thus far.
Yeah, what were some of the surprising pains that you found within the industry, and how did you solve it with Poseidon Strength?
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see what Mark has to say about this. But I think a really big one was efficiency. I know, Manny, you come from the collegiate setting in the U.S. here, and so you really understand what some of the parameters are with a collegiate athlete of having time limits that they're allowed to be in a facility. So 20 hours a week may sound like a lot, but when you start to chop that up over 7 days a week, it really starts to dwindle pretty quickly. And then when you have to consider everything that the athlete has to go through, meeting with nutritionists and athletic trainers and strength coaches and their positional coaches and studying and practice and so on and so forth, so much focus has to be on efficiency of what we're trying to do as an organization. And that just data collection, that performance data collection on a good daily basis is so critical for these competitive organizations to really find their competitive edge. And we heard that pretty early on, that sure, there's tons of technologies that exist out in the world today, whether it be the force plates or the any kind of isometric holds or VBT softwares, GPS data, and somebody has to sift through all of this. How can we
Mm.
simplify some of that? How can we kind of consolidate a few of these pieces of technologies, really boil it down to the basics of data that is needed to inform a decision, and make it as streamlined as possible. So athlete comes in, does his reps, coach gets the data, next guy, and on and on. And I think the with every evolution that we go through with our physical product, we get a little bit better with that efficiency standpoint. And I think there's a handful of challenges that we address, but I think efficiency, especially in a collegiate setting, is so critical to be able to get good daily data and understand how not only the individual but the team as a whole is performing.
Yeah. So I'm curious now, Mark, which one was yours, and what did you sort of come up with and identified?
That's a very good question, and fortunately, it was a question that we asked everybody we've talked to, or what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing today? And I think the one that somewhat surprised me the most, to answer your question, was that every organization does everything differently. And you already touched on that. You said, you have to get different answers in product market fits. Like, people use different units, different metrics, different things are important. We heard fascinating things like, depending on what organization you're at, sometimes the relationship between strength and conditioning and athletic training can be very symbiotic. And sometimes it's like they're on two separate islands. And the
Hmm.
more that we identified as this niche for ourselves with the strength diagnostics, rehab and assessment, I think that was very relatable to me, coming from the engineering world, because if you have to solve a problem, a lot of times the very first thing you do is collect data, and you want to take very good measurements. And I think, we saw that opportunity where some of that disconnect, some of those procedural challenges, and, some of those, we did that different here. We could be a tool that could help streamline and simplify some of that between organizations by just giving very accurate measurements, very good data, and doing it very efficiently.
I think what springs to mind is measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, that's definitely that's a key one.
I like, and this to me is fascinating, as I've mentioned, and this is why I reached out. Was like, this is a very unique set of ways to work, and because it's intent driven, like you're only putting in as much as you're getting out, essentially. Like that's so important as well, because like what you've mentioned, and that injury, because it happens in so many different positions, and like you can have a weaker sort of squat phase downwards than upwards, you can be really strong. Is like, how can we implement this one thing to fix these issues? How, what are some of the feedback now that the machine's out and there's people using it? How have you found that feedback from it now being used in the way that is intended?
Yeah, I mean, some of the very initial feedback that we received was the psychological aspect that, there might be times in a career of like injury recovery where you don't think you're capable of something. But
Hmm.
when you eliminate the fear of failure, or you eliminate the fear of overload, and you give somebody the means to very safely produce force on their own, athletes would identify like, oh wow, I'm a lot further ahead than where I thought I was. Like, maybe it is time that I'm ready to go back to weight training, back squat, whatever the tested or body part affected injury area is. Um, I think that that part's very interesting. And other interesting feedback that we've received is that sometimes even what we're doing can be a very good gauge of just like player engagement. Like you
Hmm.
said, you're only getting out of it, which you articulate it very well. You're only getting out of it what you put into it. So if you see an athlete who's you're collecting data that's kind of all over the place, why is that? What's going on there? That was And again, that's feedback that we've received. That's not our own theory. I just find that a very interesting aspect of kind of the industry and the training world too.
Hmm. I think it's a good point as well, because as a coach, you always know who your workhorses are and who is someone that's sort of just hanging back a little bit. But like, to have actual measurable data, I think can quickly siphon out like who's actually putting in the effort and time to really develop their injuries. And like, how have, again, have you correlated that return to play becoming quicker, or is that something that you have found?
We have not been able to correlate that yet. We're still very early on as far as being in the stage of our business, but we were able to place equipment with two pretty prominent, research departments at universities, and they've begun conducting research with our equipment. And those are exactly the types of things that we would like to be able to prove with our technology and with our machines.
Yeah, I kind of want to dive into the research element of it. But just before we do, are you able to get measurable data on the measurement side and how you, like, performance output you are on the machine, and how that affects the psychological element of the athletes behind it?
Yeah, I mean, some initial, like, another fascinating thing we saw were some locations that we visited. We've had the opportunity where a coach will actually bring athletes out and put them on the machine. And I
Mm,
think the first really interesting result we've seen of that is verbal cueing. So just a guy doing, it could be anything from bent over row to trap bar deadlift to a bench press, any movement. When that coach is present and like he's standing there, the guy's doing his reps on our machine, and all of a sudden he just starts unloading and motivating him and yelling at him. You'll see an immediate, like, 30, 40, 50 pound spike in what he's doing. So I think that aspect of and after seeing that, we were actually turned on to some research. A lot of people have actually conducted research on the effects of verbal cueing. So
mhm.
that side has been very interesting, and that's probably one of the first things that we got to witness.
Yeah, I would love to see some of those statistics,
Mm-hmm.
because that's very fascinating. It's the same as music. When athletes are exposed to some type of music within their workout, and the research has been done, and I think it's a 20% spike in performance. So if you're running, you can get 20% further. If you're lifting, you can get 20% more effort out of the athlete. So that's a very fascinating area of our industry, is like, how can we motivate our athletes?
Well, the other side of that we're really interested in testing is visual cueing as well, because you can see your force production in real time on the screen. So I mean, when force plates really came to prominence is when we started to really be able to better understand and study post activation potentiation and muscular endurance. But to apply that to a functional movement with a barbell and the athlete being right in front of a screen that's dictating to them where their force production is occurring and at what levels, that's also a really interesting thing, because typically you see, the second or third rep is kind of where your post activation really peaks out, and then they'll start to kind of trickle off from there, where sometimes we'll see it in the third, fourth, fifth rep where it's they hit it hard, and
Mhm.
they're, oh, I got more in the tank, I got more in the tank, I got more in the tank. Or so it's really kind of this unique kind of scenario that we didn't necessarily set out to achieve or draw. We kind of knew what we had uh, the abilities to do in its most basic form. But as we study this more and more, that's been a really interesting aspect of it.
Yeah, you touched on a really interesting point, and I don't think it's talked about enough. Is like that first phase of the second rep, the technique isn't there, and you're not able to sort of really gauge the amount of weight and force production that you've got in that tank. How has the sort of feedback from that been with the machine that you have?
Yeah, that's something we see quite often. We've had opportunities at different trade shows and like a local training facility to have days where we might get 600 people using one of our pieces of equipment. And one of the very common things you will see is like the difference between the first, the second rep, and then every rep thereafter. So as people start to figure out the loading and the motion, then you maybe rep 3 through 10, the graphical output is almost identical, but it's figuring out that first or second where you see a big fluctuation. That's another area with research that would be something fascinating. That's the type of opportunity we hope to pursue, which is just what drives that, and why we see that in our performance data.
Hmm. An interesting question, and I wonder if this is something that's been tested yet. But have you seen like a max effort, like top max effort, and then easing off into like nicer, cleaner, not cleaner reps, but nicer, sort of less intense reps straight after?
Um, yeah, we've seen that. I think maybe the answer to that would be, we get into the velocity based training realm. And that's one area where, when we researched how that's done today, there's different methods to determine power output with weights. And um, the power output, or the velocity through the whole range of motion, is averaged, where we prescribe the velocity and that can be changed. So I think seeing the difference in what somebody's capable of when you set them at a really low speed and let them do that
Mm-hmm.
max effort, and then you put them in a fast velocity and you just see that struggle to try to make, sometimes it's 25% of what they were able to do at zero point 0.3 or zero point 0.4 meters per second when you take them up to like 1 meter per second. I think that difference, and then the ability for us to quantify that and track a shift to the right in the force versus velocity graph over time, that's been very interesting to me.
Yeah, because I've sort of been thinking with this element of, obviously there's very different ways of methods that we implement as a strength coach. Like you've got conjugate, you've got French contrast, you've got triphasic, but again, those things were created for the coach's specific clientele or specific people that they were working with. But for me, I've got different athletes from different sports, so one doesn't favor me better than the other. So I've sort of been implementing these hybrids where I'm catching things from different elements. So the speed to then a max effort, I'd be very curious into knowing like the type of results that you've had and how that's been implemented throughout your research.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the variety of athletes that get thrown at this, from max strength to max speed, and kind of the middle of the curve being your peak power athlete, and how force fluctuates depending on which movements at which velocities. There's kind of a wealth of research that I think really needs to be done and better
Mhm.
understood on the topic, and we hope to be one of those companies that really get to um, you know kind of be the tip of the spear at more granularity within force production of a multi-joint range of motion. There's wealths of data that exist within the isokinetic realm It comes more from a clinical setting, and it's more joint rotational stuff. But not a lot of research has been conducted on what we're doing. But from a movement patterning perspective, and really being able to understand exactly how and where an athlete produces force,
Mhm.
I think is probably the biggest benefit to what we're trying to achieve, giving coaches better granularity into contributing secondary muscle groups to an overall compound movement, and being able to focus in on accessory movements to support that overall multi-joint movement. I'm not sure if that answers your question
No,
100%, because we're still kind of on this learning journey, and we're kind of one of the early companies into this space that is making a isokinetic technology broadly available in a high strength application, especially when it comes to functional strength.
yeah, no, like you did answer the question. I wanted to say that first. But for me, it's like I start thinking of different ways and different applications, and I think that's just what you've mentioned before. Like as a strength coach, you always trying to figure out how you can best optimize it for the clientele that you have, or the athletes that you have. So with me trying to like implement these different areas of performance, I've always wondered if there's like one set way of working two things at the same time to achieve better results. And I think with it being intent driven, you can tinker a little bit more with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you can, and I think from your seat as a strength coach, I think what we really help you do is baseline, and identify strength deficiencies in your athletes or your clients very quickly. I mean, we understand today that in onboarding phase of a young athlete in a collegiate or early professional career is typically a 2 to 3 week training block. And our
Mhm.
goal is to help deliver technology that effectively cuts that down to days as opposed to weeks.
Yeah,
So you're getting kind of the benefits of isometric and isotonic movement built into one, because it is velocity based. It is what you put into it is what you get out of it. So over time, I think what you're asking is, we are as eager to be able to answer that with data,
yeah, yeah,
as I think you are interested in seeing the results as well.
yeah. With the research that you are currently undergoing, what's some of the areas that you are looking into?
Yeah, the very first thing that always comes up when we talk to people about opportunities for research is, a comparison between what we're doing and how we're collecting data versus force plates. And
Mm,
with our equipment, it's very easy to even use force plates with our equipment. You can get data from two streams. And then, some of the data and some of the research opportunities we want to pursue is just the differences in what collecting data through the entire multi-joint range of motion versus one instance in time or one instance in that motion can tell you, and how much more valuable it can be. One example that we always give is, you might do an isometric hold test and you can gather data just at that one point in the range of motion.
mm,
When we look at people doing something like a trap bar deadlift, we see athletes that come off the ground low and build strength the whole way up. We see plateaus, and we see people that are used to really getting that weight moving at the bottom, and they're explosive, and then they actually fall off with force generation. And at the halfway point of those three graphs, which would be about a mid thigh pull, they all look like the same athlete. But when you look at how they generate power through the entire range of motion, they couldn't be any more different. And I think, taking that and then, converting that data and that research into how you can train somebody to get them to where you want to be, whether it be force versus velocity based or overall strength through the range of motion. That's the first immediate opportunity I think we would like to identify and, successfully complete.
How long are we sort of waiting for the research to come out, and what has been identified so far?
The first thing, we've gotten very good feedback as far as the repeatability. So that's the first thing. You want to make sure your data is repeatable and that it can be gathered accurately. And that portion of the research that we're conducting, we've gotten good feedback, and we're wrapping that up. Um, And then I think what we'll move on to next is some of the comparisons, like what I just mentioned. Unfortunately, we don't have a timeline there. We're kind of, we're at the mercy of the individuals that were willing to work with us, and we're just happy for the opportunity. And when they can get it wrapped up, we're happy to, review the results with them.
Not fast enough, Manny.
I was going to say because I would love to get some reading done on that. Like I've not just blow smoke up your arses, but like I'm very fascinated in this type of training because it can help so much with the like return to play and effort based training, which for me is what I value most. Like if an athlete comes in and he's had one of the hardest days of his life, but I like he's done everything perfect, ate well, hydrated well, slept well. That doesn't mean shit if he's had a bad day. So
Mhm.
for me, with that intent based driven performance, it can still make him or her have the best session for that day.
Yeah, and that's really what we hope to inform with all this. I mean, there's mountains of data obviously on your traditional methodologies, and then more into the 90s 2000s you started to see more focus on isometric holds, and then what Cal Dietz did with triphasic training. And it's we're just looking to be another valued tool in the toolbox. And as far as somebody studying isokinetic application to functional strength training, there's not a whole lot that exists out there
Mhm.
today. So we really, when I say not fast enough, I'm genuine when I say that, because we're interested to see what the data tells us and what the results are, um, long term. Because really being able to understand exactly where and how an athlete produces force throughout a range of motion drastically changes complementary changing
Mhm.
training regimens for that specific athlete, especially within a specific sport.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, with how like if we go back to the collegiate setting, there's so much that can be involved with just the day to day. Like they've got practice, they've got weight room sessions, they've got studying to do exams, and then having that one equipment where we can just let them input as much as they can. I think it's a good way to still keep that needle pushing.
Yeah, we agree 100%.
Last question before we get out of here. Favorite PR song?
Um, I'm probably going to get laughed at for this, but you say favorite PR song?
Yeah.
Big fan of Waylon Jennings. So just about any Waylon Jennings music. Love the old country. That's got to be my
Nice.
go.
I've this has only came since I was in America, but I've gone really into country music,
Oh yeah.
like to an embarrassing amount. Like I've made two playlists just on country music.
Brad makes fun of me because I'm either listening to like Charlie Daniels, Hank Williams, Waylon Jennings, or my other go-to would have to be Metallica, the one.
I'll rate it.
I have a really hard time with this one, because I am a broad spectrum of music. I mean, you can come into our shop when we're working out and you might hear Charlie Daniels one day, so some
Mm,
some throwback classic country. You might hear some modern country like some Luke Combs or Jason Aldean. You might hear Pearl Jam or Metallica. Kind of, I think I would say if it's a PR song, it depends on what are we PRing. Is it a deadlift? Is it a shoulder press? Is probably gonna
that makes sense. And back to Mark's point, I think I'm going to get laughed at this. But like if I have cardio, like a long cardio session, I'll listen to Chris Brown. For some reason, that gets me through it. I don't know why.
Hey, when it
There's
comes to
no
cardio, whatever works, right? I mean,
exactly. Like I have no idea why, and I hate myself for it. But like Chris Brown is the only thing that gets me through it.
That's really interesting. I mean, it could be Nickelback if that's what you're into.
Nickelback is good too. Like I've always struggled with people's hatred for Nickelback.
Same, but I'm just happy that Creed is on a resurgence right now.
Yeah, fair, fair. Thank you guys for coming on. If you want to plug the socials and the website, you have free range on that. I'll also link everything below if you want to figure out and know more about Poseidon Strength.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Manny. PoseidonStrength.com, at Poseidon Strength across Twitter and Instagram. Um, And yeah, give us a follow, reach out with your questions, comments. I mean, we're really looking to understand how can this be a valued tool within today's strength training repertoire.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. I
Yeah,
really, really appreciate it.
can't thank you enough for the opportunity. So thank you, Manny.
Yeah, appreciate you having us here, Manny. It was a great talk.
No, thank you guys. Peace.